Well, welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to have you joining us for this moderated discussion on restorative practices in action. My name is Laura Liz Morales Silva. I'm the Manager of Capacity Building at FPWA. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So we do encourage participation. I know the webinar format is limited, but please use the Q&A or the chat function for questions or comments. We will leave room at the end of the panel as well to answer any questions that we may have missed. And we will be sending out a follow-up email. So if we didn't get to your question, we will try to get to it with that follow-up email. The session will be recorded and posted to the FPWA website. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a short post survey. So please take those 2 minutes to complete the survey. We really appreciate it. And as always in these foundational trainings, please take care. The session may include information and discussions about trauma, so feel free to, put us on mute, step away, take the space and time that you need. Just take care. And just a note on format, we will no longer be using the breakout rooms at the end, but we'll instead leave additional time for Q&A in the main room. And before we get into the content of today's session, we'd like to give a brief overview of FPWA as an organization and highlight the ways in which we support the nonprofit sector. FPWA is an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with a membership of around 170 human services and faith-based organizations. We promote the social and economic well-being of individuals and communities by advocating for just public policies and strengthening the human services sector. As the programs team, our primary focus is on that last part, on strengthening human services organizations. And we do that by supporting nonprofit and faith-based institutions in building their capacity to use a trauma-informed and people-centered approach to service delivery, organizational effectiveness, and civic engagement. Today, we are so lucky to welcome a wonderful group of practitioners of restorative practices. We welcome Ashley Ellis, co-founder and co-keeper for Breathe Circles at Breathe Collective, Dr. John Ducksworth, regional coordinator of the multi-faith campaign Ending Mass Incarceration, Elizabeth Clements, executive director of Hidden Water, and Demarisa Steele, organizer, facilitator, and keeper at Hala, How Our Lives Link All Together. You will hear more about each one of these fantastic panelists later today, but first we will hear from our moderator, Mika Dashman, who will help to set the context for us and share the big picture of today's topic with a brief intro to the concept of restorative justice. Mika is an attorney, mediator, and a zealous advocate for restorative justice. She is the founding director of Restorative Justice Initiative, a citywide multi-sector network of practitioners, advocates, and community members seeking to increase support for and access to restorative justice approaches for all New Yorkers. Mika is a New York State certified mediator and has mediated criminal court cases and facilitated community conferences through the New York Peace Institute. Mika also facilitates peacemaking and community building circles for organizations, student and professional groups. Mika, we are grateful to have you moderating this discussion today. Over to you.
Thank you, Laura Liz. Good morning, everybody. It looks like there are almost 100 people here. I can't see any of you, only numbers, but I'm going to do my best to imagine that we're all in a room together. I'm really happy to be here today with some very esteemed colleagues and co-conspirators. I've been asked to give an introduction to restorative justice in lieu of a previous webinar, which unfortunately had to be canceled. So I just want to start with the disclaimer that this is going to be a very brief introduction to restorative justice. There is a lot more to say, and you will hear a lot more from the panelists later on in our discussion. So first, before I give a definition of restorative justice, let me say that there is actually no one agreed upon definition of restorative justice, and that's really important. So you could ask any one of the panelists here today, and they would probably say it a little bit differently. So restorative justice, it's a theory of justice. It's rooted in indigenous societies. It can be applied both reactively in response to conflict or harm, or it can be applied proactively to strengthen community by fostering communication and empathy. So it includes both principles and practices. And at the center of restorative justice is relationship and community. You're probably going to hear those words a lot today in our discussion. So restorative justice centers healing and transformation, and usually, not always, but it often includes direct dialogue between people who have caused harm, people who have been harmed, and their communities and or supporters. So sometimes people think that the term restorative justice refers to restoring some kind of pre-existing state. It's less about restoring something that existed before, as it is about making things as right as possible under the circumstances. The term itself, restorative justice, was coined in the 1970s. It was really meant to, initially it referred to modern criminal legal system applications of ancient practices that are found in indigenous communities around the world, community building practices and community justice practices. So it's when we talk about restorative justice, it's talking about a modern iteration of something that has been around for a very, very long time, that is rooted in very old practices that have been continually practiced through to the present by indigenous folks around the world. And it's an umbrella term. So it includes a range of practices and applications. So I was asked to explain the distinction between restorative justice and restorative practices. You'll probably notice different people on the panel using those terms, each of those terms, and using them a little bit differently. So what I'll say about it is that the way that I think about restorative justice is as this umbrella term. And so when I think about restorative practices, I'm talking about circle keeping or peacemaking, which you'll hear more about later, but I'm also talking about community conferencing, dialogue practices such as victim offender mediation, victim offender dialogue, and similar processes. So many different applications and many different iterations. So some folks, when they only use the term restorative justice for applications of this work within the criminal legal system context. And so you may hear people using the term restorative practices just to refer to different applications. So keep that in mind as we continue our discussion. So why is restorative justice important? It's important for so many reasons. Can you hit the slide, Laura Lise? Next one. Oh, community participation. Yeah, so the community is always going to be involved. As I said, restorative justice is has a community building component to it that is a precursor really to any response to harm. And that's very important. People sometimes want to enter restorative justice at the point where harm has already occurred. And if you do that without having built a strong foundation of community, you will find that the response to harm is not very effective. So you'll notice that I use the term accountability in that last slide. And really, if you take only one thing away from hearing me speak today, I hope it is that I feel very strongly that we must disentangle the term accountability from the concept of punishment. Those two things are not synonymous. And in fact, they run counter to each other. So the way that I think about accountability through a restorative justice lens is as a active multi-step process. It's not something that can be forced or coerced. However, there are things that we can do as restorative practitioners to create the conditions whereby people are more likely to be able to take accountability for harm. So when I say multi-step process, that means, first off, acknowledging the harm. I have to acknowledge my responsibility for causing the harm. I have to take steps to make things as right as possible. And I also have to take steps to decrease the likelihood that will happen again. And more often than not, that involves healing on my part as somebody who has caused harm. And the beautiful thing about restorative justice is that through this process, both the person or people who have caused harm and the person or people who have been harmed can find healing. So restorative justice is really a paradigm shift, as this quote states. It moves us away from dominant cultural values of individualism, competition, and punishment and domination. So it brings people together, and at its best, it provides opportunities for everybody impacted, everybody in the community to have their voice heard. The best practitioners that I know think about restorative justice as a practice or a way of life, not a tool, a service, or a program. I think you'll hear that from the panelists here today, but I want to stress that point, especially for those of you who are just being introduced to this concept and just beginning your learning about restorative justice or restorative practices here today. So without further ado, I'm really excited to be in conversation here today with Ashley Ellis, Dee Marissa, Dr. John Duxworth, and Elizabeth. So what we're gonna do today, format-wise, is we're going to have this conversation as if we're in a circle. So as if we were in the room together and we were sitting in a circle, restorative justice circle process, and where we often will pass a talking piece around so that whoever is holding the talking piece has the floor. So that means we're going to go in a particular order, with Ashley speaking first, Dee Marissa next, John, Elizabeth, and me. Everybody is welcome to pass on any round. You don't have to respond to every question if you don't want to. And I just want to remind all of us to be aware of our shared time and to step up if our tendency is to hold back, and to step back if our tendency is to be long-winded. So yes, ma'am. Ashley has requested a change in the speaker order. Marissa, how do you feel about going first?
I was good with going second.
Did you say you'll deal with it?
I said I was good with going second, but
Good with going second. Okay. Well, let me ask the first question. How about that? And then you all can decide. Let's do it this way. I'll ask the first question. Whoever is moved to respond can speak first, and then that'll determine the talking order. Okay. So the first question, what brings you to this work? And how does it tie into your identity or your life story?
I'll jump in. So my name is Marissa Steele. I am an organizer, community organizer, youth organizer, circle keeper, and many other things, oftentimes the my energy of many spaces. I would say what brings me to this work, there have been many avenues, many pathways that have brought me to this work. I would say my first example of organizing or would have started when I was about 14 years old. I used to, play in the front park with the elders and the young people in my building, and I realized we didn't have many things to do. And so our, I would say, idle hands would always cause us to be just playing, horse playing and things of that nature. So I would kind of gather all my friends and do dance or do art or do singing or something. And in the moment, I didn't realize that that was organizing. I just thought it was a way to have fun. But as I journeyed along, I realized that I had the ability to collectively get people together and shift the energy. And then, filtering through many different systems and career paths and working with folks who are underrepresented or harmed in many ways, folks who are trying to be galvanized or looking for spaces to galvanize them in their own healing. I kind of was able to gain more consciousness about the importance of being an organizer and holding space for people so that they can get to that. And how it is connected to my identity. I am a mom, I'm a woman of color, also a part of a queer community. And so I realized that a lot of those communities that I'm a part of are under attack in many ways. And also my direct connection to many other communities. I'm a mom of a son, a Black male. I'm also a mom of a young Black woman. And so I think those connections made it very clear that I had a purpose to help organize my community around issues that greatly impact not just my family, not just myself, but us as a greater community. And learning the stories of others, I realized that we're journeying through a lot of the same systems and a lot of the same harms. And so I wanted to be a voice to kind of try to advocate for those folks and change that.
Good morning, all. I enjoy being here. John Ducksworth. And Mika, your question, what brought me to this work? Well, what brought me to this work is, as corny as it may sound, is my belief in God. It's my understanding of my belief and my faith work, that I have an understanding of justice. And I've always historically been on the side of the table advocating for men of color and women of color who had been incarcerated or been involved with our court system. And that goes all the way back to the early 70s, that involvement came about. But my involvement with restorative practices, restorative justice, comes about in the 1990s, early 90s, because I realized as a person of faith that I have to be on both sides of the table if I truly understand justice as my faith, as all faith, the major faiths uplift. I've got to be willing to do right for the person who has committed the harm, just as well as I have to do right for the person who has been harmed. And our current judicial system does not allow for that. And more often not, even in faith communities, we don't work on both sides of the tables. So what I found was restorative practices gave me an opportunity to be who I was as a man of color, be who I was as a man of belief, of faith, and do this work. So, and how does it factor in, how does it resonate with me today in terms of the work that I do today? Still as a man of faith, still working within the church faith community, it has allowed me to even broaden to where this started on a journey within a Christian community, but now my work is in a multi-faith community, where we're in every faith community, and recognizing the importance of justice, not to be confused with our criminal justice system, but the idea of justice as it lifts itself up in all of our beliefs and interaction with God or our supreme entity, supreme being, and working for everyone, for those who have been harmed as well as those who commit the harm. My faith doesn't allow me to make a distinction. And I also get joy because I would be amiss if I didn't add, many faith communities don't understand, don't even recognize how they can have a role in restorative practices or have a role in our criminal justice system. You know, so many people lift the idea up that, well, our prison system started with Quakers giving Bibles in institutions in Pennsylvania and developing solitary confinement. But the argument doesn't start or stop there. But so that's my job, is to, you know, keep it alive and bring restorative practices within the faith community and beyond. And I will pass it on to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Received. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Clements, and I came to this work, well, let me say personally, I come from a family with 5 generations of child sexual abuse, including myself was harmed as a child. And when the next generation, my nieces and nephews, started to get harmed, I decided, like, this has got to stop. And though I had tried many different avenues, mediation and different things to try to resolve conflict in family systems where child sexual abuse had occurred, it never went very well. And it seemed to me that most processes were harming more than they were helping. I will just say this about the criminal justice system, which is, you know, most of us think, when we think about child sexual abuse, we're thinking about the religious leader, the teacher, the coach, or something like that. But actually, the vast majority of people who are harmed by child sexual abuse are harmed by a family member, someone inside their family. And a very, very, very small fraction of people ever seek out the criminal justice system to resolve conflict around child sexual abuse. Most people who have been harmed do not come to the place where they're ready to disclose that for 25 years or more, which was the case for me. And it just became very apparent to me as I got older. And now I'm in the position of an adult looking at younger people being harmed, that I realized, like, there has to be a different way to address child sexual abuse, both the healing, the accountability, and then also the prevention of it. How do we stop it from reaching the next generation? So that's probably why my work is very, very tied up with my identity. You know, the people in most people's family who have harmed, you know, will never take responsibility for having harmed. But there's a growing number of people who have harmed who want to take responsibility. There just isn't a great pathway for them to step in and take responsibility. And so at Hidden Water, we work with people who are harmed, people who have harmed and are ready to take responsibility, non-offending parents, and then other loved ones like siblings and spouses and adult children. Because I really appreciated, by the way, Mika, your introduction to restorative justice. I thought it was really clear. And in fact, you know, giving an opportunity for all the people that were impacted by sexual abuse in a family system is crucial, actually, to both healing and I keep saying both, but it's really healing, accountability, and prevention. And it has to be voluntary, which I thought, Mika, you brought up too. You can't force someone to take responsibility for having harm. They have to want to. And, you know, often I also appreciate something else you said, which was like, it's not a one-off intervention for an episode or something like that. It's actually a way of life. And if the family system is the most motivated system probably to heal, it has to have the structure and the support and the guidance to know how to walk the path to healing from harm. So thank you for inviting me and appreciate being here. And I'll pass to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Mika, can you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yeah. What brings you to this work, Ashley? And how does it fit into your identity and life story?
Thank y'all. So my name is Ashley Ellis, and I am the daughter of late Bailey Ellis and the daughter of Lizzie Jenkins, born to the west side of Chicago. I am a sister, a wife, and partner, and I'm recently a mother to an angel baby, Asha. And I would say that my first introduction to this work came in 2011 when I sat in a circle in Chicago, and the circle trainer was Cheryl Graves and Pamela Purdy, and they introduced peacemaking to me in a way that I had never imagined. But before that, I think that I was always a young person that sought out peace because I grew up in what could be considered turmoil, you know. I grew up in a neighborhood as loving as it was still, you know, I came outside to drugs every day, to gangbanging. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing, because these were the people that protected me. These were the people that loved me. And I think that I credit that way and that view of them to my mother. If you was to ask my mother would say, you know, I come from the gutter, right? From the guttermost to the uttermost. But I think that my mother always had a gift of seeing people beyond what was in front of us or what was presented to us. And so I had aunts and uncles that were addicted to drugs. I had, you know, folks that were in the game. I had folks, like these were just, but my mother taught me to see them as human, to see them as people who had gifts, as people who loved me and who protected me, who were worthy still, right, of redemption, of second chances. And I don't think that I really recognized the seeds that she was planting in me until I began to get a little older. And when I was in college, I had the opportunity to visit a maximum security juvenile prison in Illinois. And I'll never forget this tour. And we went to what was the solitary confinement unit. And I remember each set of doors that I passed, a set of Black and brown faces appearing at the glass. And it transformed everything that I thought I would do and that I would be. But the thing that stuck with me most is I was always most curious about the stories, right? I knew that I had saw the revolving door. I had saw guys off the block, you know, leave for a moment and come back, and then they leave again. And I kept trying to figure out, you know, who are they at their greatest selves? You know, what could be different if they had a different opportunity? What brought them to this point? And I was just always intrigued about stories. And I think that practicing circles and peacemaking gave me an opportunity and a practice to create space for folks to show up and share their stories. It taught me to listen deeper. It allowed me to practice the gift that my mother had passed on to me, to see folks. And later on, I would learn of the indigenous and ancestral language, you know, that we were practicing around Sawabuona and Ubuntu and then Lakesh, and, you know, allowing ourselves to see ourselves in one another and to be connected and dependent, and, you know, like to really be an experienced community. And so I think that, you know, RJ for me is an embodiment, you know, it's an embodied practice. It's not about what we do. It's about who we get to be in community. It's about not just restoring relationships between me and a person that was harmed, but, you know, coming back and remembering ourselves as whole, you know, individually and collectively. Yeah. And so when I think about how it informs my identity, you know, I like to see myself as somebody who embodies its practices, who shows up, you know, and it holds me accountable to how I show up in community, you know, compassionate as a listener, as somebody who's holding space, as somebody who can extend grace and give somebody, you know, second and third chances, somebody who's fighting to transform systems, to push us towards liberation and freedom, even if I don't get to see it in this lifetime, you know. And so, yeah, you know, and in the midst of harm and in the midst of loss, for me, it also informs how I get to be and see community. You know, how does community show up and hold? How does community, you know, extend love and be loved? So all of these things, you know, outside of the check boxes that people think RJ is, for me, it is, it informs my life. It informs how I show up, and it informs that which I am connected to every day. So I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
You've all said so much. What I would say about myself is that although my initial point of entry to restorative justice was through my work as an attorney and my interest in the law and the legal system, the reason that restorative justice moved me and resonated so deeply with me when I heard the term and began to learn more about the concept and its applications is because I have been wrestling with some of these themes, I feel like my whole life. And also I come from legacies of people on both sides of my family who have suffered great harm and have inflicted great harm. And both of those things, both of those realities, both of those roles exist in my ancestral lineage. I know some of the stories, and there are many that I'm sure that I still don't know and may never know. And from a very young age, I think that I was very preoccupied with the why of violence in particular. I couldn't understand why people would harm each other in the ways that I learned that people had and did. And I wanted to understand why. And I also had a sense that violence didn't occur in a vacuum and that it was cyclical. And I remember from a very, very young age, I think maybe I was 6 or 7 when I learned about the concept of being a conscientious objector. And I wanted to make sure that if if the draft was reinstated and it impacted women when I came of age, that I would have a way, I would find a way to not participate in war, because I had a sense from that very young age that there was something incredibly fruitless about war and the way that it perpetrated cycles of violence. So for me, this work has always been central to my own healing process. And I also want to say that I think for myself, especially as a white person and my particular histories and cultural backgrounds, one of the main legacies of the harm that my family has both experienced and perpetrated is disconnection. So I didn't grow up with a lot of connection to my extended family. I didn't grow up with a strong sense of being part of a community. I didn't grow up with a strong sense of being a part of anything. And that's a very big loss. And so for me, this work helps me to reclaim not only my full humanity, but also my rightful place in community. So the next question, some of you already started to answer this, but the next question I want to ask you is to describe the work that you do, and you can define that any way, whether it's the work that you do as part of your organization, or however you think about your restorative justice, restorative practice work. Just give the participants a sense of, what is the what? What does it look like in practice? Do you want to start again, Dee Marisa?
Yes, peace. So how would I describe the work that we do? So first I want to say, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, that I am the legacy of a generation of fighters. My parents were Black Panthers. My uncle, grandmother, they were known for galvanizing, entire housing developments, organizing against inhabitable living conditions in NYCHA. And so part of that is the legacy that we stand on as we proceed into this work, that and many of our other elders. So that leads me into being like a community organizer, youth organizer, and a circle keeper. And I think that we found that we're not necessarily looking to restore, but our work is in healing justice and transformative justice. I would also like to say that the work we do is centered in peer organization. I've been homeless. I've been a family member of persons impacted by the punishment system, where I am. I was my journey as a young person mirrors very similarly to that of young people impacted by foster care systems. I'm a single mother. So a lot of the work that I do is to give back the wisdom of survival in those healing spaces, but also showing up as an advocate for people in those spaces, and just trying to be a journeyman, journeying with young people in those spaces. We are social and healing justice advocates. Our main focus is to dismantle the systems that are grounded in white supremacy and educating our communities that we are at war. Developing a critical consciousness around the systems of oppressions to empower our people. We teach from a community-specific and non-traditional approach. Our work is grounded in African and Indigenous worldviews, and we believe that our culture is our education. So hopefully that answers the question.
what I do in my when I see my role in the faith community is twofold: bringing restorative justice practices and principles to the faith community for a couple of different reasons. One, so they can recognize the harm and begin to heal from the harm that's committed within their own community. It's a mistake if we believe that people in the faith community don't harm other people in that same community, or if we don't harm people of faith in other communities. So my role is to bring that into the fact that even within our own community, we are perpetuating harm, and there is harm being done, and we have to heal from that. And I'm not taking anything away from the power of prayer and healing. But I also believe that restorative practices plays a role in healing in this life. I also see in bringing restorative practices within the faith community to uplift the idea that people of faith have a moral and a theological responsibility to address our criminal justice system and address the harms that are being committed by our criminal justice system, involving our criminal justice system, and just around the world. You know, I'm not a person of faith that believes that we want to preach about getting to heaven and disregarding the hell that we're living in today. So I see that as all part of my work in the faith community, being involved in advocacy, being involved in social change, lifting up justice right to the center of who we are as people of faith. In a way, a couple of weeks ago, I had to introducing the Islamic community to restorative practices. And at the end of it, in the closing round, one of the sisters just talked about how wonderful she felt having the opportunity to be in a circle, in a restorative circle, in a healing circle, with just other members of her own mosque, other males who were in the mosque itself. And for me, a light went off, the fact that here, even in this community, a new type of healing was taking place, a new type of harm that, I mean, I had no idea of was being healing. And within that community, they felt so much better. I take great joy in things of that nature. And as I said, just bringing people of faith to this idea of what restorative practices can be utilized. A lot of people may not be aware of it, that even with abuses by clergy, there have been examples where restorative practices are being utilized to bring about healing, both internally for people within that community, as well as for the victims of the various sexual crimes that have occurred. So that's, you know, I hope that answers your question or give you some idea in terms of why I just see restorative practice is so much a part of my faith and wanting to share that with others, both in and out of the faith community. And with that, I think I pass it on to Elizabeth. Right?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Expert. Yeah, I guess I had a chance to speak a little bit about hidden water, but I think, you know, based on what Dr. Duxworth is saying right now, I feel that way about hidden water in some ways. It's almost a faith community. It almost feels that way to me because it is a community healing itself. Many people who have been harmed by child sexual abuse do not have family members who want to step up to be a part of the healing and taking responsibility. And so within Hidden Water, everyone in the community has a personal experience with child sexual abuse. So we don't have social workers or therapists or people like that. All the circles are led by people who are doing their own work because they also have a personal experience with child sexual abuse. So as people come into the community and go through our 12-week circle program with other people that have had the similar experience to what they've had. Then some people want to step up and be trained as keepers and then hold the next circle for the next folks. And so we have several hundred people going through Hidden Water every season. We have 2 seasons. And I think, you know, the important part about it is that it's both an opportunity for individual healing, but in the case of child sexual abuse, because it's happening in the system as are many harms, you cannot address a harm such as that without addressing the system. The system is harming itself. And it's not just, you know, decades ago when the harm happened, it's ongoing harm because the system colludes with keeping it secret, not bringing it forth, you know, blaming the victims, denying, deflecting, minimizing. And so the harm is ongoing in family systems where child sexual abuse has occurred, and therefore has to be addressed in this way. So in Hidden Water, we have 4 different colors that we call for people who have been harmed: green, people who have harmed, ready to take responsibility, purple, non-offending parents, orange, and other loved ones, blue. And we even have a circle for people who are both have harmed and were harmed, special circle for that. And so we think of our theory of change as you first do your individual work. And Mika said also in the beginning that people who are going to take accountability, it's usually they can't until they start down the path of their own healing. And so we do think of those affinity circles as an opportunity to do your own individual healing, because otherwise you're not going to be able to show up with a lot of consciousness and an awareness of how you're impacting the system if you don't sit with people that have had a similar experience and work through your own, both your own harm that's happened to you because of this, and also the ways in which you've harmed others because of this. And then the second step in Hidden Water is really what we call collective healing, which is we put people of all the different colors together. And that's not necessarily your family members, just people who may be placeholders for family members, and work in a circle together with other colors. Because until you understand and hold space for other folks who are holding different roles inside of a family, that next level of healing isn't going to really take place, because we're really looking for the collective healing, the systemic change, not just the individual healing. And then ultimately, to start to see yourself as someone who is in a powerful position because of everything you've learned and grown and healed and understood and take responsibility for, you're in actually a very powerful position to prevent child sexual abuse from reaching the kids in your life. And so that third part of Hidden Water is creating folks who are not afraid to go out and speak about this, you know, stop it from happening, notice signs that it might be occurring, and intervening. Because when the shame of child sexual abuse burns up in the anger and the healing and the work and the responsibility, it's then and only then that you're really in a position to get out into the world and stop it from occurring to the next generation. So yeah, that's our work. And I'll pass to you, Ashley.
Thank you. So this is really an interesting question for me recently in this season, because most people who know me as the co-founder and co-keeper alongside my partner Quandisha to the Breathe Collective and Breathe Circles. And to breathe means to be balanced, restored, empowered, affirmed, transformed, healed, and embodied. And that work grew out of us creating space for young women in the Bronx, specifically who were a part of the juvenile justice system and on probation. And at the time, what we recognized is that it wasn't about system, involved girls. Every girl was part of a system that we worked with. And so it was about creating space for every girl to exist, to show up in circle, and to and to have space to be whole and to be most authentic. And so we were doing circles for my sisters, and that work grew, and we continue to do that today. But from that, I started doing work in the schools. I was a restorative justice coordinator. And over the past, since 2015, I think that work has expanded in supporting individual schools in the New York City Department of Education through brief circles, doing training and coaching and consulting. And that is work that I love, and also has been the most challenging work. Because I think part of what I do as well is to invite folks to go deeper into the practice, to go deeper and to challenge themselves into transforming, right? A lot of people, I think, have asked. I do a lot of work alongside my comrade and sister, Tyler Brewster, who's in the chat as well. But we go into these spaces and these places and these systems with the hope of supporting people and teams and schools and administrations in transforming and recognizing where harm exists, and to do the work to uproot white supremacy, and the things that are constantly causing harm to our young people and to ourselves. And I often think that we come out of those spaces most defeated. And so I've been in this space as I am coming back and transitioning back into the work slowly, of asking what is my work, right? And I think one of the things that I'm recognizing is that the growth of restorative justice has been exponential, but the change that is necessary is actually very slow. It's slower than most of us are comfortable with. And so when I imagine myself coming back and I'm asking myself, so what is the work? What is the work that my soul must have? What is the work that will not only feed others and have others to benefit as I pour out, but what is the work that will create reciprocity? What is the work that will continue to support our community in going deeper, more deeper than we are wider? And I think a big part of that is supporting the people who are holding space for this work. And so one of the things that I've had the time to dream and imagine is something I call Who Keeps the Keeper. And it's about curating collective care and space for people who are holding, who are going into these places to hold change and to facilitate and to transform harm, to build community. Because I burnt out last year. You know, the Department of Education was asking us to do 50 trainings and without being willing to change. And, you know, when we fell on our face and was tired and exhausted, it was like, who picks us up? And how do we sustain if we are to be the keepers and the holders of this practice? And so part of the work that I am excited about doing is creating space for the holders, creating space for the keepers and the facilitators of this work, and those who are coming into it to begin to do that work. Part of my work too is to be a friend and a comrade alongside other practitioners. You know, I think that that's really important, that it's not just about organizational work, but my work is also connected to who I get to be in community. And so for some of the people who are on this chat, you know, I've stood alongside to just think things through, to dream things and bring it into reality. Because I think that that is also what it means to be restorative, right? It is to sit alongside somebody, you know, all it takes is two to create a circle. You know, it's in the midst of them showing up like I fucked up and I need somebody to hold me. I need somebody to help me see my way through, you know, and it's to be a friend, it's to be a partner, to be a comrade. And so that is also the work that I get to do. I get to just be me, and that is my prime work. And more recently, I have began to also recognize that my work is to rest. My work is to dream. My work is to be a visionary and a curator. But none of that can happen if I'm exhausted. None of that can happen. I can't move and help to be in community and move us towards liberation and freedom if I'm tired. And so right now, part of my work is resting. Part of my work is taking my time. It is changing the way that I say yes. It is making room for other folks and practitioners to show up and be their best. But more importantly, it's for me to just be, you know, even when it's not connected. If I don't do nothing else, I'm all right. So right now my work is to be, and to be alongside y'all in community. Yeah.
Ashe, Ashley, Ashe.
Thank you.
We could all learn from that example, Ashley. Thank you for saying that. So my role is primarily as a connector and a convener. I am on a mission to break down silos and isolation in the way that people are doing this work in New York. And I also have a big vision of some kind of unified collective body. And so what I mean by that is, as you can tell from the conversation we've had here today, restorative justice, restorative practice, healing justice, transformative justice, it is a very big tent. We don't all use the same language. We don't all come from the same foundational principles and understanding. We come from very different backgrounds. We don't all have the same goals. But I firmly believe that somewhere at the heart of each and every one of us who's drawn to this work, there's a desire to be in right relationship, community, and connection with each other. And I think that the concepts that underpin our work are really powerful. I think they're transformative. I think they're revolutionary. And I believe in power in numbers. And so my work as the founding director of Restorative Justice Initiative is to bring people together across New York City, across sectors, across different applications of this work in different contexts, to try to find those kernels of shared understanding and shared common goals, and support each other, share information and resources, increase transparency, and build collective power. So that's my goal with Restorative Justice Initiative. And I want to invite everyone who is attending this webinar today who's not already connected with us, not already subscribed to our mailing list, to find us on the web. I think that the URL will be distributed later, as well as ways to contact all of the panelists. It may already have gone out in the invitations. So we have time for There we go. That's my information, and you'll get the contact information for everybody else as well.
Yes, we'll be sending out information for all of the panelists' organizations so that you can connect and do a deep dive into each one of the panelists and their organizations, the wonderful work that they all do.
Yeah, and stay in touch and find ways to support our work and to collaborate and, and partner with us. So we have so many more questions, juicy questions that I would love to dig into with all of you, but we have time for probably one more. So I'm going to ask this broad question to give everybody a chance to say before we go to audience questions. What is one thing that you most want people to understand about restorative justice or transformative justice or healing justice that hasn't already been said here today? You can reiterate something that's already been said if you feel like it's important, but if there's anything else you want to just put out into the room, into the conversation that hasn't been spoken yet, this is the time to do it.
Yeah, so I think our next question would be that, which was talking about our roles of accountability and healing in the work. I would say one, we really just got to learn to be people's people. I want us to understand that when we activate ourselves in this work, we can't shy away from the crystallization, right? So your work is not limited to your 9 to 5. It's not limited to, the Zoom calls. It needs to be who you are as an individual. And you have to journey with that as you journey into your community, as you journey in with your family. Oftentimes in these spaces, we don't talk about how important it is to be doing this work at home. How we need to integrate more restorative or healing conversations within our families, how we have to foster more spaces for love, and how important journeying is, but also the understanding of what journeying is. I think Ashley's point was key when she said her mom believed in who people were at their best selves, right? And that's a slice, but also we have to be able to hold space for people where they are and understanding that that journey could be tomorrow, that journey could be 6 months, that journey could be 24 months. We at Holly, we have a 24-month process with our young people. And that came from having a smaller process and realizing that sometimes young people need more time to cook. They need more love. They need us to lean in a bigger way. And organizationally, we need to provide space for people if we're really signing on to their healing. The other piece is that we got to be able to do the work unapologetically, because there is no real number to attach to some of the work that we do. For Hala, some of our greatest work is like we're training other organizations for free. There's no capitalism attached to that, but we understand that an essential part of the war is passing down or reconnecting us with that information, with our teachings. There's 60 years of learned lessons. There's stories of individual resurrection and community organizing and movement building that are hidden in the prisons, in the minds of our political prisoners. Right. And so it is our job, it is our duty to give that information, whether we are being paid or not, because that's how we truly win the war. So I think that that's important. And I think we need to get back to creating intergenerational and intersectional spaces and ensuring that all of our spaces are intergenerational and intersectional, because we got to learn from each other. We got to pass down the information and the legacy. And I think that those are the ways to restore us as a community, but also to help us reimagine what community needs to be going forward. And I want to be intentional about moving away from restoring, because we already know that what it is right now is problematic. So do we really want restoration? No, we want healing, we want change, we want to get back to our indigenous ways of being in community and loving everyone and validating everyone. And the last piece of accountability that I want to touch on is like, you know, we have to also hold all of us accountable. It can't just be, you know, Black and brown people in the fight because we have to be in the fight because this is our reality. You know what I mean? Like, we need our allies, our white allies, to be like, this is real from a humanistic perspective. Like, we all have to hold ourselves accountable to lean into our humanity. Yeah, so that's my piece, and I'm going to pass.
Thank you. One of the things that disappoints me about the work that I do with restorative justice in and out of the faith community is that here in the United States, we seem to have compartmentalized this work. You know, we say it'll work in our schools. You know, we try to make it work in our schools because we found zero tolerance doesn't work. We try to make it work in our criminal justice system, although early on in the 70s and 80s, our criminal justice system rejected restorative practices. And even here in New York State, there are places where within our criminal justice system, restorative practices are rejected in our system. But what really disturbs me is the fact that we see restorative justice so often as in our schools, in our criminal justice, whereas in other parts of the world, people see restorative practices changing their country, changing the way they do business. And there, when you look at how much disconnect we have in this country, how much isolation, how much fear, how we are so many of our systems are so much in need of repair. I mean, there's so much hatred spread in our country, and our inability to make this part, restorative practices as part of the conversation on a national level. You know, it will repair some of the damages that's done. I think it was 60 Minutes last week or something that I was watching, and here they took people from blue states and put in red states, put them in a room together, created a conversation, put them in circle, used some of the tools of restorative practices. Not once did they say, well, we're using restorative justice. Not once. Was anything else? But the fact is, there's just so much healing that has to be done and on a national scene that we just haven't risen the conversation up to that. That's something that disturbs me. And I just think there's a need for that. I think that we need to push it and make it part of the national agenda. I mean, we're still discussing in New York State, can we have restorative justice in our classrooms? You know, so again, that's a part, Mika, that I feel where we miss. And I know the work that you do here in New York City to get restorative justice lifted up, and some of the struggles that you have just here in the city. So I can, and it's no different. So that's where I would lift it at. We need to have it work in our society amongst ourselves, because so many people in this society are hurting for so many different reasons. And Elizabeth, I don't want to preach, so let me pass it on to you.
I think people probably appreciate your preaching. Thank you for the question. I think I want to, lift up a little bit of what Marissa is saying as well. For people who have been harmed, it's traditionally been, in child sexual abuse, it's like the rest of the system is like, oh, that sucks. Good luck. I hope you can feel better someday, and like this lack of accountability in the whole system, right? And so the model that Hidden Water is really putting forth works for all different kinds of harm, especially race. And to be able to see yourself both as someone who is being harmed by the way the system works, seeing yourself as someone who is harming and contributing to this system in whatever way you might be, seeing yourself in the ways you have power and you're being a bystander instead of an upstander, and the ways in which you might not have power and you might be being negatively impacted by the system as well, although you're not the central component. You know, you're also a witness, but you still have a part, you're still part of the system. And it can't heal. The system cannot heal. A person who's been harmed by child sexual abuse cannot heal without the non-offending parent, the people who have harmed, the other loved ones stepping in and saying, actually, this is happening to me too. This is also happening to me. It's not just happening to you. It's happening to me because I love you, or I'm part of this sister, or I'm part of this community. And if we don't all start to see ourselves as people who are being harmed, people who are contributing to the harm, and bystanders with or without power, in the different ways that we play in, we are all four colors, basically. We are all four. We hold all four positions wherever harm is happening, because harm is not ever individual. It's always systemic. And so, you know, I want to say that lots of people want to just put their head in the sand, right? Lots of people, but sometimes it's easier to step up and say, I'm harmed. It's not easy, but people who are being harmed have to do it, because otherwise they'll die. So they don't really have a choice, right? They have to, it's like, I'm going to go down down the whatever down, or I'm going to do my work and try to get better. And so I can live and thrive. But the rest of the folks have maybe more chances to put their head in the sand, and they can't. And so we call this the purple path. We call it the path to healing from having harmed. We all harm in different ways. And we have to learn how to take responsibility, be quiet and listen, is often component. Like, I notice lots of people who have harmed sexually, they talk a lot. They're trying to explain why they did that and why they're sorry and will you forgive them? But that's not actually the path to healing from having harmed. The path is to listen deeply, feel the pain you've caused, hold space, and change, shift, support the people who have been harmed. And so, and I just want to say, it's not just, people who have harmed sexually, it's all of us in small and big ways. We harm the people around us. And if we don't start to recognize ourselves as both victims and perpetrators, and bystanders of different systems of harm, it won't heal. It can't heal. It won't. And so, I want to lift up the purple path, because I do think it's a really important and not often talked about. People talk a lot about how do you heal from being harmed, but not a lot of people talk about how do you heal from being the harmer. And it's a courageous path that deserves compassion and support. And I think the compassion and support that is most profound is when we all see ourselves as people who are contributing to the harm, and what can we do to get conscious and hold space for people who are being harmed. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to say one last thing about what Ashley said. Really appreciate this idea that you can get burned out. Like, if it's, it's like you can't do it all. You can't rescue the world. You can only do your part. And the beauty of restorative justice is it's collective healing. You only have to hold your bit. Let the other people hold their bits, and then holding it up isn't so hard. And also the collective wisdom is so much more profound. And so I do see restorative justice as encouraging both stepping in and stepping back and letting other people step in, that it's not quite so heavy when we all play our part. So thank you all for this profound conversation. Pass to you, Ashley.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I know we're wrapping up. Something I think I want people to take away is I want to highlight just all the things that you all said. And so thank you for sharing that and something that Elizabeth said is around one of the thoughts that I had, is that remembering that like violence and harm, a lot of times we treat it as it is just interpersonal, that it's just happening between people. But I think Sonia Shah said that violence is simultaneously interpersonal and structural all the time at the same time, right? And so we always have to remember that it's not just individual, but there are systemic evils that exist that we have to acknowledge, and we have to also do the work to transform. Because if we don't transform the social conditions that are creating the things that we are responding to where harm is happening, right, then it's like we're doing the healing for the harm and the person who committed the harm and sending them back into the same situation. And so we have to transform the conditions and the systems that are also perpetuating and creating harm. But the thing that I wanted to uplift and have people walk away with is remembering that RJ and restorative practices, however you see it, feel it, or say it, it's an embodied practice. It is holistic. I think that was Dr. Ducksworth who said, we compartmentalize, how we do this work over here and just all these different things, but in this Western context. But I think that RJ is about remembering the wholeness. It is coming back to ourselves. It is coming back to the wholeness in which we are connected to in community. And that is not just the people, but that is to the earth. That is to the all living beings, right? We have to coming back to that. And then I'll say go slower and go deeper. Urgency is a tenet of white supremacy. And I think that oftentimes when people ask or have a vision of participating and holding this work, we want to go fast. We want to see the transformation happen in 3, 6 months to a year. But that is not how it works, right? So it's okay to have it go slow. And to be committed to going deeper. And the deeper is not just in the work, but it's in ourselves, right? Because it is here, it is this location that I have to do the work to uproot, right? To begin to try different things, to put a new lens on, to try a new mirror, right? And so it starts with us. And this is where the depth has to start to inform how we show up in community. And then last but not least is that we cannot engage in this work absent of spirit. We cannot engage in this work absent of spirit and ritual. It is the necessity, because if we don't understand the spirit of the work, if we don't understand the spirit of the people who we are in community with, that we are doing this work alongside, we begin to miss things. And so I always, you don't have to steal people's practices. You don't have to steal, right, folks? Like, figure out what your ritual is. Figure out what spirit looks like for you. But this work comes in tandem. When we speak of it, we're speaking of work that is rooted in spirit. And so we cannot do it absent of spirit ritual, and we cannot do it absent of acknowledging its indigenous and Black roots and where it comes from. Folks ain't just pull this out the sky, and the circle practice is not just some we was just sitting around one day and was like, hey, let me write a curriculum about this because it works. This comes from a place. It is ancestral. It lives in us. And we have to acknowledge where it comes from as well. And so I always say let's not forget the spirit of the work. Let's not forget the spirit and the ancestors that guided and show, and allow us, and allow to make room for it to happen continuously. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank y'all.
I see a lot of friends and colleagues and community members in the chat and a lot of affirmations and people adding additional quotes, and it's really beautiful. So if you're not paying attention to the chat, I encourage everybody to spend some time there. Just have a little bit of time left to try to answer some of the questions that have come in. But before we do that, I just want to really express my deep gratitude to all of the panelists for this conversation. I really hope that we can do this again, if not in this format or setting somewhere else. There's so much more to say and to uplift and to discuss about this work. And I think there's a tremendous hunger for sort of a roadmap for how to move through the world in a different way. And we have some of those answers, some of those insights to share. So I want to start with a question that Jose asked. Hi, Jose, about surrogate restorative dialogue. Question is, does anyone have experience using surrogates in restorative dialogue? If the person responsible for harm cannot participate in the process, and what are the best practices for finding an appropriate alternative? I'm really glad you brought that up, Jose, because I really think that surrogate dialogue, which is also sometimes called vicarious dialogue, is really promising and underutilized restorative practice. And there are lots of folks who are using it. I know in particular, folks have used it in the context of sexual harm and violence. I encourage you to look up the work of Alyssa Ackerman, who's based in California. She has an organization called Ampersand's Restorative Justice that does training and consulting. And they have a lot of experience with vicarious dialogue. And I also want to uplift a documentary film about another member of our Restorative Justice Initiative Community Board of Directors called The Worst Thing, about Kathleen Pequeño and her journey to engage in surrogate dialogue to heal from the murder of her brother. So that is a really interesting story, a really unique application of this work. And I see you have your hand up, DeMarissa, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some wisdom around this as well. There's a documentary that we used with our young people called What I Want My Words to Do to You. And it highlights some of the work of the Bedford Hills sisters. And within that documentary, this group of incarcerated women who were, justice involved women who were facing like really long sentences were writing letters or narratives about their struggles with their crimes, with their families. And there were issues of intimate partner violence that came up and many other issues. And so they wrote those letters, they shared them within their groups, but then there was also a forum where they had other actors come in and read their letters to the community. And so I thought that that was an awesome practice, but also sometimes writing empathy letters to yourself is a great practice because it's a great way to be heard. Yes, I can definitely put that in the chat, but it's a great way to be heard and to hear yourself, and doing that in a communal space. We've done a lot of those exercises with our young people as well.
Can I just also answer that at Hidden Water, we had initially thought that what we wanted to do was take the whole family system and just do a circle. And then we realized, like, you can't just do a family system. You have to put them in the affinity spaces before they're going to be able to show up powerfully in a circle like that with people holding the different positions. And so eventually realized, like, not that many families have 5, 6, 7 people who are going to step up to do the work. And so we started doing multicolored circles, which are people of the different colors in a family system, but not necessarily from one family. And that's probably our most powerful work. It's really the heart of Hidden Water in a lot of ways, is people who have done the individual healing and the affinity circles now want to sit in spaces with people who are holding other roles, even though that's not the person who harmed them, or that's not their child that was harmed. And then to listen to someone else who's had that same experience as someone in your family, be accountable, especially when the purple folks who have harmed show up in a space with green folks. I don't think there's anything in Hidden Water more healing for someone who's been harmed than listen to someone who has harmed take responsibility, even though that's not the person who harmed them. And, you know, many times the people who have harmed us are dead or not doing the work. So the few people that show up to do the work of having harmed can, and then sit with other victims who have been harmed, it's so powerful. Also, non-offending parents who can be so dismissive of harm, showing up to really take responsibility for their part. It's one of the most powerful things going on right now, in my opinion, in Hidden Water. And it's not necessarily the way surrogate, you know, intent, you know, surrogate spaces. I think the way you're thinking of it, it's a little different, but I do put it in that same camp as the surrogate healing. Thanks for the question.
I would like to add in to the question. When we think of surrogates, we think of the person who's been directly harmed. Often people who are involved have been indirectly harmed, and so they never have access to the people who did the harm. So what I also find being utilized is bringing in surrogates to work with the people who have been indirectly harmed. A case in point is like when a hate crime occurs. Well, if someone throws a brick in your house, if someone throws a brick in your worship's experience, even if you weren't there, you identify with it. So bringing in surrogates allows even that population who normally are not allowed to talk about their fears, their anxiety, their stress, has proven to be very effective. When I work with faith communities, when people see someone victimized on the other side of the country simply because of their faith, they can relate to it, but they're not part of the equation. So, you know, not only is it, I know, Mika, your question dealt with surrogates, or Jose's question dealt with surrogates, but I also think that they're not surrogate victims, but they're people who have not been directly involved, but who experience the same, some level of anxiety, stress, and are in need of healing, in need of repair. So I also include that into the equation when we think of surrogates.
I just want to acknowledge Mallory's question, which we won't have time to answer in any depth, about a restorative response to sexual harassment, and whether that can be used in schools. The very short answer to your question is yes and yes. And keep in touch. And if you have specific context in which you're thinking about this, and you want to talk to somebody in more depth about how to address a specific situation, you can reach out to really any of the folks here on the panel.
All right, so before we wrap up, I just wanted to thank everyone again for joining us. Wanted to thank all of the speakers for just sharing your stories, your work for creating and making spaces that are healing and transformative. Again, we will be sharing information about each one of your organizations in the follow-up email, so people on the call can reach out and connect. And I might even send you some of those Q&A questions, so if you have a response that we can share with everyone who was on the call. So again, thank you, Mika. Thank you, Ashley, Dr. Ducksworth, Elizabeth, and Demarisa. This has really been a wonderful hour and a half. So sad that, you know, we can't extend it another half hour, maybe another hour, but we might consider a part 2. So just be attentive to our emails. Next steps, please everyone join us for the next foundational webinar. We will be focusing on trauma responsive organizations. That will take place on November 10th from 10 to 11:30. And we'll be really exploring what it looks like to successfully create spaces where people can feel seen and heard in your organization. So please join us on November 10th. You can log in, you can register on our trainings page, and just a reminder to please complete the post survey. I'll put that in the chat. It'll only take about 2 minutes, and your feedback really helps us create the best possible content and webinars and panels like this. So really appreciate it. Mika, any last words?
I'm just catching up on the chat. So much love to you all. Thank you for spending time with us today, and thank you to my fellow panelists. Thanks for inviting us, Laura, Lise, and everybody else from FPWA.